Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into something more Victorian than a mustache dipped in laudanum. Spiritualism, the world of séances, table rapping, and your grandma's favorite Ouija board. That's right. We're diving headfirst into the glorious, weird, and occasionally deeply awkward 19th century obsession with chatting up the dearly departed. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for the background hum, unless you're brave enough to sit in complete silence, tuck your feet in so the spectral hands can't tickle your toes, and settle in. Make sure your phone is on Do Not Disturb. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it's like to join hands around a wobbly table with your neighbors, your dog, and a paid medium who may or may not be hiding a fishing line up their sleeve? Have you ever felt the urge to ask your late Uncle Harold if he ever found his false teeth on the other side? Do you worry about accidentally contacting the wrong ghost and getting stuck with a Victorian insurance salesman for eternity? Were Victorians really so bored that they had to invent entire social rituals for talking to invisible people? Did anyone ever successfully ask a spirit for next week's lottery numbers? Or did most séances just devolve into people accusing each other of moving the planchette? What exactly did people wear to a séance? Is there a dress code for haunting your friends? And did the spirits get a cut of the ticket sales? Or was it strictly BYOG, bring your own ghost? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1872. The wallpaper is giving you a rash. Everyone you know is obsessed with mourning jewelry, and your neighbor insists their dog is channeling Napoleon. Good luck. It's 1851, and you, like everyone else, are surrounded by an uncomfortable amount of death. Child mortality rates are higher than your Wi-Fi bill, and even a mild cough could be fatal. Victorians coped with all this gloom by inventing new ways to stay in touch with the dead, because grief, as it turns out, is the mother of invention. Let's set the scene. You wake up, groggy, in your chilly London bedroom. The wallpaper is slightly mouldy, the family cat is probably haunted, and somewhere outside, a neighbor is coughing like he's auditioning for a part in a consumption-themed opera. The newspapers arrive stuffed with obituaries, printed in fonts so ornate you wonder if the typesetters get paid by the swirl. You're not even finished with your first cup of tea before you hear the local bell toll for yet another lost soul. Victorian mornings are not exactly bursting with positive vibes. And it isn't just the numbers, though. Truly, the numbers are bleak. 1 in 3 children never makes it to their 5th birthday, and most adults have lost at least one close friend, relative, or suspiciously wealthy uncle before their second cup of breakfast gravy. In an age before vaccines, antibiotics, and vitamin gummies shaped like dinosaurs, even a sniffle could mean doom. Coughs echo through the city like the world's most depressing percussion section. There are so many black armbands on the street that it looks like everyone's part of a very morose bowling league. But Victorians, being Victorians, do not just accept their tragic lot quietly. No, you and your neighbors respond with determination, creativity, and an insatiable appetite for making a social event out of absolutely anything, including death itself. Mourning becomes an art form, with strict rules and enough etiquette books to collapse your favorite shelf. Grief is not just a feeling, it's a whole lifestyle. If you don't have at least 3 different types of black clothing for various stages of sorrow, are you even trying? This is where the obsession with the afterlife takes over your drawing room. When every family loses loved ones at the speed of Victorian mail, the natural response is to want proof they're still out there, somewhere. Maybe Grandma can't physically hand you her secret scone recipe anymore, but surely she can knock on the wall 3 times if you promise to use real butter. Hence, the birth of spiritualism. Mediums are suddenly the hottest new influencers. Séances are the TikTok challenges of 1851. Except the only thing going viral is existential dread. You find yourself clutching a copy of the Family Guide to Communicating with Departed Spirits. now with 20% more Latin incantations, wondering if the cold spot in the hallway is the ghost of your first hamster or just bad insulation. Friends gather by candlelight to ask the dearly departed practical questions. Where's the lost will? Who keeps moving the teaspoons? Is the afterlife biobe? But beneath the surface, all this ghostly socializing is really just a way to make sense of the senseless. You're desperately seeking order in a world that seems to specialize in randomness. The rules help: morning clothes, morning stationery, morning tea sets. At least you know how to dress for the next funeral. There are so many funerals. Still, there's a kind of comfort in it all. Mourning gives you a script. Séances give you hope. Even if you spend half your time whispering to a table, it's better than the silence left by someone gone. The Victorians wrapped themselves in ritual like layers of itchy black wool. Part protection, part penance, part look how seriously I take my grief, mother. By midnight, after another long day of missing friends, dodging outbreaks, and pondering your own mortality over cold beef and slightly suspect custard, you climb into bed surrounded by memories and the faint scent of funeral lilies. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaks, and you briefly wonder if it's a sign from beyond, or just the cat being dramatic. Either way, you fall asleep certain of one thing. In the age of the great Victorian death crisis, nobody is truly gone as long as you keep inviting them back for one more conversation. And tomorrow, there will be another story, another séance, another chance to ask your favorite lost aunt whether she ever forgave you for breaking her favorite teapot. You've been invited to your neighbor's drawing room for an evening of ghostly entertainment. The invitation specifies no shoes, gloves encouraged, and absolutely no skepticism allowed. You can't remember the last time you had this much social anxiety about sitting in a circle. So, you arrive 5 minutes early, because lateness is a sin, but not nearly as grave as forgetting to bring your own silk handkerchief. The house is already thick with anticipation, and just a hint of mothballs. You're greeted at the door by your neighbor, Mrs. Wigglesworth, whose real name is probably something normal but has long been replaced by her reputation for elaborate hat choices and a fondness for fainting at inconvenient moments. Tonight, she's decked out in more black lace than a vampire wedding. You're ushered into the parlor, which smells of rosewater, nervous perspiration, and the burning hope that something interesting will happen before the biscuits go stale. The furniture has been rearranged for maximum dramatic effect. Chairs encircle a wobbly table that's seen more life as a hat rack than a surface for supernatural encounters. The lamps are dimmed to funeral home chic. Heavy curtains block out the last honest rays of daylight, as if even the sun might be tempted to eavesdrop. One by one, the other guests arrive. There's Mr. Pickering, who claims he's only here for anthropological research but keeps checking his watch. There's Miss Eglantine, who's brought a notebook and a very large pencil in case the spirits want to dictate their memoirs. There's the vicar, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, and a random cousin who nobody invited but can't be asked to leave because they're already sitting on your left. The mood is a mix of excitement, fear, and that weird tension you get before a team-building exercise. Then, the medium enters. She glides, she swishes, she absolutely refuses to answer to her Christian name. Tonight, she is Madame Rowena, channeler of spirits and collector of dramatic jewelry. Madame Rowena sets the ground rules. No crossing your legs, it blocks the energy. No making faces, the spirits have feelings. And most importantly, no laughter, unless it's nervous and muffled by your gloves. You sneak a look at the clock and wonder how long you can hold your serious spiritual seeker face before someone notices it's really just your holding in a sneeze face. As the séance begins, Madame Rowena insists that all hands be placed lightly on the table. There is an immediate disagreement about whose hands are too heavy and who's secretly pressing down. Mrs. Wigglesworth is convinced someone is channeling her late parakeet. Mr. Pickering is just convinced someone's eaten all the biscuits. You all sit in the near dark, breathing quietly, hoping for a sign from the beyond, or at least a passing breeze. The ritual unfolds. Madame Rowena murmurs, eyes half closed, asking if anyone present would like to speak with their loved ones. Someone at the end of the table gasps. The table creaks. You freeze. It's either an ancient spirit manifesting, or the table is doing its best impression of a haunted trampoline. For the next 20 minutes, you alternate between skepticism, terror, and the strange urge to giggle whenever the vicar's mustache twitches in the candlelight. A faint tapping begins. Madame Rowena declares it's the spirit of Lord Wellington, come to deliver a message about the sherry. Your neighbour's dog starts howling in the next room. There's a sudden cold draft, everyone gasps, but it turns out the cousin just opened a window. You feel equal parts relief and disappointment. Is it a ghost, or just the hazards of British architecture? By the end, you're not sure if you've communicated with the other side, or just spent an hour watching your friends try not to blink. You've survived your first séance. You have new respect for both the living and the dead, and an overwhelming urge to wash your hands. As you leave, Madame Rowena assures you the spirits were most impressed with your aura. You're not sure what that means, but you take it as a win. Congratulations! You've completed your introduction to Victorian spiritual socializing. Just remember, next time, bring an extra handkerchief. The dead and the biscuits. Wait for no one. In walks your medium for the evening, a mysterious woman draped in more scarves than a Parisian winter. She introduces herself as Madame Euphrosyne, which is definitely not her real name, and promises she can summon anyone, living or dead, for a modest fee and a slice of cake. She takes her place at the head of the table, rearranges her bangles, and immediately begins scanning the room with eyes that say, I have seen things you people wouldn't believe, but also I might be allergic to cats. She smells faintly of lavender oil, anxiety, and the distant hope of a second helping of Victoria sponge. You're not sure if you should feel awed or worried, so you settle for both and check that your pockets are free of loose change, just in case the spirits start requesting a tip. Madame Euphrosyne's outfit is less tasteful mourning and more I raided the lost and found at an opera house. Layers of velvet, lace, and mysterious beads clink with every dramatic hand gesture. Her jewelry seems to multiply when you're not looking. At one point, you're fairly certain her earring is winking at you. The effect is less subtle spiritualist and more grand finale at a costume shop fire. But you have to admit, she owns the room. Even the family portrait above the fireplace looks intimidated. She has a way of making small talk that feels vaguely like a job interview for the afterlife. Is there anyone in particular you wish to contact tonight? She asks, eyes locked onto yours like a psychic barn owl. You think about it. Should you ask for Great Aunt Edna? The family goldfish? Or just a general inquiry for any spirit who's good with relationship advice? Madame Euphrosyne assures you she can reach them all, provided the veil is thin and the refreshments are plentiful. Before anything begins, she starts the pre-séance warm-up. Everyone must release their earthly tensions. This involves a short, guided meditation where you're asked to picture your spirit animal. Yours appears to be a very confused hedgehog, while Madame Euphrosyne hums what she claims is an ancient Sumerian tune but sounds suspiciously like the theme from a toothpaste commercial. You try not to giggle, as Mrs. Wigglesworth next to you inhales so deeply she nearly faints into the custard tarts. Now comes the dramatic monologue. Madame Euphrosyne shares her life story, or at least the version she's using tonight. There's the tragic childhood, the first ghostly encounter at age 7, the moment she realized her tea leaves could spell out horse racing results, and the time she accidentally summoned the spirit of her neighbor's cat, who still haunts her favorite armchair. The line between truth, fiction, and performance is thin, but it hardly matters. Everyone's hanging on her every word, partly because the show is genuinely compelling, and partly because no one wants to be the first to break the spell by asking for the bathroom. Next, she begins her energetic scan of the group. She points to Mr. Pickering and solemnly intones, "You are carrying a great burden, Mr." Pickering looks guilty, but it turns out he's just sitting on a whoopee cushion. Madame Euphrosyne transitions effortlessly to Miss Eglantine, telling her, "There is someone with you, someone small, fond of cabbage, and extremely critical of your handwriting." Miss Eglantine turns pale. Everyone agrees it sounds exactly like her late Aunt Beryl. The séance, under Madame Euphrosyne's guidance, is part group therapy, part magic act. She dispenses gentle wisdom between bouts of ghostly drama, encouraging you to share your deepest hopes, worries, and, if possible, favorite cake recipes. The lights flicker. Madame Euphrosyne closes her eyes, channeling the vibrations. The table rattles. You feel a strange mix of skepticism and longing, a desire for real answers and just a dash of entertainment. By the end of the night, Madame Euphrosyne has offered comfort, closure, and a few questionable predictions about next week's weather. Whether or not you believe in her powers, you can't deny she's done her job. Everyone feels a little lighter, a little more connected, and a lot more likely to invite her back for leftovers. And if you catch her pocketing a slice of cake for the spirits, well, who could blame her? In a world full of uncertainty and dark nights, a good medium and a good dessert are sometimes all you need. The séance begins with table turning, a Victorian party game where everyone gently rests their fingertips on a table and waits for it to wobble. Is it a ghost? Is it Gladys from next door pushing too hard? Nobody knows, but everyone's too polite to accuse each other, so you just keep circling the table until someone gets dizzy. You find yourself seated between Mr. Pickering, who smells faintly of mothballs and barley, and Miss Eglantine, whose approach to personal space suggests she's trying to merge with your aura. The air is thick with anticipation, dust, and the kind of tension you only get when a room full of English people are pretending not to notice someone's foot asleep. Madame Euphrosyne, the medium, instructs everyone to lightly touch the table, just enough to feel a feather land. Someone immediately presses down like they're trying to start a lawnmower. You look around at your fellow participants. The lights have been dimmed to a level best described as lost in a coal mine. Candlelight flickers, casting shadows that seem, if you squint, almost human. The floral wallpaper looks a little more menacing than usual. The table itself, wobbly on the best of days, has been carefully selected for its uneven legs and its history of creaking ominously during thunderstorms. The mood is set, somewhere between supernatural revelation and extremely low-stakes Jenga. Madame Euphrosyne begins the ritual. "Spirits," she intones, "we welcome you. If you are present, make yourself known. But please, nothing that stains the carpet." Everyone exhales nervously, unsure whether to expect a tap, a knock, or the sudden manifestation of Aunt Beryl demanding her silver back. Fingers twitch. The silence is only broken by the sound of Gladys quietly clearing her throat, and Mr. Pickering's digestive system joining in with a low, haunted rumble. After a minute, nothing happens. You glance at the clock. It's been 90 seconds, which, in séance time, is roughly equivalent to 3 hours in an elevator with your boss. Just when you start to wonder if anything will happen, the table shudders ever so slightly. A gasp goes up from the group. Miss Eglantine looks terrified. Gladys tries to look innocent, but her eyes are suspiciously wide. The table shifts again, ever so slightly, then begins to circle clockwise. Is it the ghost of a Victorian butler, still trying to tidy up? Or is it just the combined muscle of a room full of people who, despite strict instructions, can't resist a little light pushing? The answer is lost in a swirl of polite glances and the kind of British decorum that would rather see a table levitate than admit anyone's cheating. Madame Euphrosyne interprets every movement. "A gentle spirit joins us," she announces, as the table wobbles energetically toward the fireplace. perhaps seeking warmth. Mr. Pickering immediately apologizes, though no one's sure if he means to the spirit or for almost knocking over his tea. Soon, questions are being asked. Are you there, spirit? The table tips, ever so slightly, in what could be a yes or a reaction to Gladys's third helping of trifle. What is your name? Someone ventures. The table attempts to spell out an answer, but halfway through the alphabet, gets stuck on G, L, and A. You wonder if you're about to meet the ghost of Gladys, still living, but haunting the séance out of sheer boredom. The beauty of table turning is in its ambiguity. Every twitch could be a message from the other side, or just a group effort to relieve the collective anxiety of waiting for a ghost to RSVP. No one is brave enough to call out Gladys for heavy-handedness, and Gladys isn't about to admit to anything. So the night carries on with everyone carefully balancing the supernatural and the socially acceptable. Eventually, the table slows, then stops. Madame Euphrosyne declares the spirits satisfied with your receptive energies. There's a polite round of applause, because if there's one thing Victorians respect more than the dead, it's a job well done, even by furniture. As you leave, you realize that whether or not you made contact with the beyond, you've definitely learned one thing. In Victorian England, even the ghosts have impeccable manners. And somewhere, Gladys is already planning next week's séance, determined to perfect her technique and maybe even let the spirits have a turn. The Ouija board arrives, fresh from America and ready to spell out all your regrets. The rules are simple. Ask a question, touch the planchette, and try not to panic when it spells out, buy more cheese. Is it supernatural wisdom, or is it your subconscious craving dairy? The spirits remain vague. Victorian England has seen its fair share of spiritual fads, ghost photography, mourning jewelry, ectoplasmic cheesecloth, but nothing captures the collective imagination quite like this mysterious alphabet board in a box. The moment it lands on your parlor table, every guest pretends not to care, while quietly elbowing for the best seat. It's the iPad of 1891. Coveted, controversial, and almost certainly haunted by your neighbor's opinions. You find yourself staring at a smooth wooden surface, lacquered letters, numbers, and the enigmatic yes, no, and goodbye corners. The planchette, a tiny heart-shaped paddle with a glass window, looks innocent enough, until you realize its main job is channeling dead relatives, existential dread, and, occasionally, recipes for beef stew. Mrs. Wigglesworth insists you use only your left hand, as that's the spiritual one. Mr. Pickering insists on washing his hands, just in case the afterlife is picky about hygiene. Everyone gathers around, knees knocking beneath the table. The gaslights flicker. Someone opens a window to clear the air, but you're convinced it's just an excuse to make a fast escape if a ghost starts spelling out anyone's embarrassing secrets. The instructions are reviewed for the 5th time, mainly so no one has to go first. Apparently, all questions must be phrased politely. The spirits, much like your mother-in-law, are said to respond better to courtesy. The séance leader, today it's Madame Euphrosyne, wearing her Tuesday veils, asks, "Is there anyone present?" The planchette trembles. A hush falls over the room. It moves. It hesitates over yes, lingers, then glides to no, just to keep things interesting. Your cousin Harold quietly accuses the spirits of indecision, but everyone ignores him. The first real question comes from Miss Eglantine. Will I marry this year? The planchette drifts toward M, A, Y, before pausing on B, Maybe. The suspense is unbearable, but then it suddenly swings over to E, maybe. A perfectly non-committal answer from a board that understands British culture. Things start off hopeful, if slightly confused. Questions range from the practical, will the price of coal drop, to the desperate, where are my reading glasses, to the philosophical, is there really a heaven, or is it just an extended tea break? The Ouija board answers with a series of cryptic spellings, some of which are suspiciously similar to the local pub's menu. Then comes the inevitable moment. The board spells out something personal, someone's pet nickname, or a date no one else could possibly know. Everyone gasps. Mr. Pickering starts sweating. For 3 seconds, everyone is convinced a genuine spirit is in the room, until Madame Euphrosyne reminds everyone that the subconscious mind is a powerful force. Also that she may have mentioned that date at last week's tea. Tension melts into giggles. The planchette develops a mind of its own, sometimes drifting aimlessly, sometimes spelling out words no one wants to claim responsibility for, like taxes or underwear. You're not sure if you're contacting the dearly departed or just channeling the collective anxiety of a group that's eaten too much fruitcake, and that's part of the Ouija board's charm. It gives everyone permission to believe, doubt, and hope all at once. After an hour, the spirits have offered mostly cryptic advice, several shopping reminders, and one rude comment about someone's hairstyle. The group is exhausted, the board is carefully boxed up and returned to its spot on the highest shelf, just in case. As you prepare to leave, Madame Euphrosyne insists the Ouija is a powerful tool, not a toy. Mr. Pickering mutters that it's really just Milton Bradley's worst nightmare and the best excuse for avoiding responsibility since the dog ate my homework. You slip out into the foggy night, wondering if you really spoke to the dead or just got outvoted by a very determined piece of wood. Either way, you make a note. Next time, don't ask about your missing socks. Some mysteries are best left unsolved, especially by ghosts with a sense of humor. Wearing black isn't just for funerals, it's a lifestyle. You've never owned so many veils, brooches made of human hair, or jewelry designed to announce to strangers just how sad you are. It's like goth, but with even worse dental hygiene. Let's set the scene. You open your wardrobe, and its less colorful array of possibilities, and more Crow has moved in and declared squatters' rights. Everything is black, except the things that are jet, onyx, or the particularly chic shade known as damp basement. Even your socks are black, just in case a Victorian tragedy strikes from the ankles up. Mourning attire isn't just about color. It's a whole taxonomy of grief. There's deep mourning, absolutely no sparkle, not even a glimmer of hope, half mourning, a touch of lavender if you're feeling scandalous. And, if you survive long enough, slight mourning, where you can add a bit of grey, like you're cautiously auditioning for happiness. The etiquette is stricter than a Victorian schoolmistress. If you get it wrong, people will judge you, your family, and possibly your entire lineage, all for the crime of showing up at breakfast in a shade closer to coal than pitch. Your mourning look is not complete without a veil. The longer and more suffocating, the better. Some widows wrap themselves in layers so thick, they're basically walking privacy screens with ankles. It keeps people from staring at your tears, your face, or the fact that you might be sneaking a cookie at your own husband's funeral. And if you have to go out, you get the pleasure of tripping over the hem while holding back a sneeze that's been building up since you first donned the outfit. But it doesn't end there. Jewelry is essential, and nothing says I'm still emotionally unavailable like a brooch made from your late husband's hair. Hairwork jewelry is the true art form of Victorian mourning, bracelets, lockets, and rings meticulously braided with locks of the dearly departed. It's sentimental, morbid, and, depending on the humidity, occasionally itchy. If you run out of relatives, don't worry. There are catalogs where you can order pre-braided hair from total strangers, just in case you want to mourn someone you never actually met. Accessorizing is a competitive sport. Black jet beads, ideally imported from Whitby, are draped over every wrist and collarbone. Mourning rings are engraved with names, dates, and, for the extra sentimental, a microscopic portrait that looks suspiciously like every other mustachioed Victorian gentleman. Even your handkerchief is embroidered with black thread, so you can sob in monochrome dignity. And then there's the social side. Victorian society has a sixth sense for spotting insufficiently somber outfits. If you so much as walk past a window in navy blue before your mourning year is up, expect at least 3 neighbours to faint and one elderly aunt to write a strongly worded letter. Public shaming is an Olympic-level event. Even Queen Victoria herself sets the gold standard. After Prince Albert's death, she wore black for 40 years, raising the bar for sadness and fashion pettiness across the empire. There are practical drawbacks. Black dye is famously unstable. Rain turns your elegant ensemble into a splotchy Rorschach test, and you spend entire seasons fighting off clouds of lint. Your hands are perpetually stained from handling your own clothes, so you blend in at funerals and at coal-shoveling competitions. Beneath all the fabrics and frills, though, is something strangely comforting. Mourning fashion isn't just for show, it's armor. It gives structure to grief, rules to chaos, and a way to signal to the world, handle with care. It's proof that even in their sorrow, Victorians couldn't resist turning sadness into a group project. One involving yards of silk, a morbid craft night, and at least one extremely itchy bracelet. By the time you finally retire your black wardrobe for something less ominous, you realize you've learned the real Victorian secret. When in doubt, dress for the worst and accessorize like everyone's watching, because in this world, they absolutely are. You decide it's time for a family portrait, preferably with an extra ghostly guest. Victorian spirit photography is booming, and nothing says loving memory like a blurry extra face looming above your left shoulder. You're pretty sure it's just Aunt Mildred, but the photographer swears it's your late cat. Getting your portrait taken in the Victorian era is already a feat of patience. You put on your best morning outfit, adjust your hair until it's appropriately somber, and shuffle the children into their least stained frocks. Everyone is instructed not to blink, fidget, or breathe in an interesting way for the next 4 minutes. There are more rules than at a séance, and that's saying something. The photographer, a pale, nervous man named Mr. Witherspoon, arrives with enough equipment to rewire the national telegraph system. There are cameras on tripods, mysterious boxes, drapes, powders, and at least one bottle labeled danger, for use only in case of ghost. Mr. Witherspoon positions the family around an antique chair, barking out directions with the authority of a drill sergeant and the optimism of a man who knows his plates will be overexposed anyway. Chin up, eyes steady. Try not to look so earthly. The baby sneezes, the dog yawns, and someone's lace veil catches on the ficus. No one is having fun, but everyone is determined to look properly mournful. After all, you're not just here for the living, you're here for the spirits too. The real show begins when Mr. Witherspoon announces, in a whisper that somehow reaches the entire street, that he specializes in spirit photography. This is not your average family snapshot. For an extra shilling, he promises to capture the unseen presence of any departed loved one. Guaranteed, or your money back. In spectral coins, presumably. He dims the lamps and mutters to his camera, as if it's likely to bite. You start to wonder if you should have brought an offering or at least a strongly brewed tea for protection. Everyone is told to stare straight ahead and think of someone dead. The more you concentrate, he assures you, the more visible the spirits become. You try to focus on great-granddad Alfred, but your mind keeps drifting to tonight's stew. The camera's shutter opens with a sound like a guillotine, and the room falls silent except for the slow, ominous hiss of the developing chemicals bubbling nearby. A week later, you return to view the results. The anticipation is palpable. You gather in the musty studio, breathing in a heady mix of varnish, mildew, and supernatural ambition. Mr. Witherspoon produces the photo, an impressive feat, considering the technology is only slightly more reliable than a séance table. There you are, stony-faced, surrounded by your nearest and dearest. And looming just above your left shoulder? A blurry, translucent face. Is it Cousin Percy? The family parrot? A poorly timed double exposure? No one can say for sure, but everyone gasps in unison. Mr. Witherspoon, ever the showman, insists that this is proof of your late cat's ongoing affection. He's even drawn a faint outline around the suspicious blur and scrawled Mr. Tibbles underneath in delicate pencil. The more you stare, the more it looks like someone just sneezed on the negative. But who are you to question the mysteries of the afterlife? You take your new family treasure home, proud to display it on the mantelpiece. Visitors can't decide whether to be impressed or unnerved, which is exactly the reaction you were hoping for. Soon, spirit photography becomes the latest craze. Every family wants a portrait with a spectral guest. Rumors swirl about who has the most famous ghostly photobomb. Mrs. Wigglesworth claims to have captured the ghost of Lord Byron, but it's clearly just a smudge. Is it real? Is it a clever trick? Or just the Victorian equivalent of adding a spooky filter to your social media? It hardly matters. Spirit photography offers comfort, a dash of excitement, and the opportunity to outmourn your neighbors, all while sitting perfectly still and hoping the cat doesn't knock over the camera. Because in the world of Victorian grief, there's always room for one more in the family photo. Living, dead, or somewhere in between. Is that a tasteful locket or a tiny urn of Grandma's ashes? In Victorian times, you're not really grieving until you're accessorizing with actual human remains. It's part statement piece, part cautionary tale for dinner guests. You begin your day with the solemn ritual of putting on your mourning jewelry, a process only slightly less complicated than preparing for battle. There's a ring on every finger, each engraved with names, dates, and in some cases, stern warnings about inheriting the family gout. Your brooch features a delicately woven braid of your late aunt's hair, so tightly knotted that you're fairly sure it's now an eternal part of your wardrobe, destined to haunt future generations with both sentimentality and split ends. The Victorians did not believe in subtlety when it came to grief. Why keep your loss to yourself when you could announce it with an entire collection of somber accessories? Mourning jewelry becomes the height of fashion, and soon you can barely move for all the lockets, pendants, and rings clinking together like a particularly emotional wind chime. Everywhere you look, there's another piece of jewelry with a tiny portrait, a snip of hair, or a carefully labeled teardrop of jet. At this point, you're one step away from wearing an entire ancestor as a charm bracelet. Hairwork is the true masterpiece of Victorian memorial art. Friends and family send away locks of hair to professional weavers, who turn them into intricate braids, flowers, and even whole landscapes, because nothing says I miss you like a tiny hair tree sprouting from a golden locket. If you're feeling ambitious, you can attempt DIY hairwork at home. Just prepare for hours of delicate looping, inevitable frustration, and the possibility that you'll spend the night untangling yourself from a half-finished necklace that now looks like a small mammal. Brooches are big, bold, and unmistakable. There are mourning rings, engraved with in memoriam, because subtlety died with your great-uncle Rupert. You might own a bracelet that could double as a family tree, each link containing a wisp of someone's dearly departed bangs. Some pieces are so elaborate, you need an instruction manual just to open the clasp. Others come with secret compartments for ashes, pressed flowers, or even a miniature will, just in case someone tries to challenge the estate at supper. It isn't just about sentiment. Mourning jewelry is a way to prove you're serious about your grief. The more elaborate the piece, the deeper your love, at least according to Aunt Agatha, who's been wearing the same brooch for 27 years and counting. If you dare to wear color before the requisite period, expect her to rattle her chains disapprovingly in your direction. There's nothing like a passive-aggressive mourning pendant to keep you in line. Even children aren't spared. Little ones wear lockets with tiny curls from siblings or parents, a literal close-to-the-heart reminder that sadness is a family value. Husbands exchange rings after the loss of a wife, wives after a husband. And, if you've truly bought in, you commission matching mourning sets for the family pet. Mr. Pickering down the lane has a brooch in honor of his late guinea pig. It's surprisingly tasteful. Shopping for morning jewelry is a social event. Jewelers' windows gleam with jet, onyx, and enamel, every display promising to make your sorrow just a little more stylish. There are catalogues, mail-order specials, and at least 3 pop-up stands outside every decent funeral. Express your love and your loss, the advertisements say, which is Victorian code for make your neighbours jealous of your melancholy. Of course, all this accessorizing comes with hazards. Jet beads are notoriously fragile and prone to shattering, sometimes spectacularly, during church service. There's always the risk that you'll mix up Aunt Martha's hair with Cousin Edna's and have to spend the rest of your life pretending you meant to. And every dinner party ends with someone nervously asking, "Is that a tooth?" But beneath the black enamel and elaborate braids, there's something touching. Mourning jewelry offers connection, a tangible link to those who've gone. It's equal parts fashion, family history, and emotional security blanket. And if it means you jingle a bit when you walk, or occasionally startle a visitor with a ring that holds actual ashes, well, that's just Victorian style. The dead may be gone, but their accessories are forever. It's Friday night. Instead of Netflix, you're attending a public ghost demonstration. There's a ticket booth, folding chairs, and a suspiciously theatrical mist machine. Nothing says fun night out like paying 6p to watch a medium cough-up cheesecloth in front of a live audience. The air is thick with anticipation and pipe smoke. You've just handed your ticket to a teenager in a top hat who, judging by his moustache, is also in the process of discovering adulthood. The hall is packed. Victorian England's hottest ticket isn't the opera, but a chance to see someone summon the dearly departed while surrounded by a crowd of people trying not to giggle. The lights are low. The scent of burnt tallow candles mixes with eau de mothball and the distant whiff of someone's boiled cabbage dinner. You choose a seat halfway back, close enough to see the action, far enough that any surprise ghosts will have to get through a wall of skeptics before reaching you. Your neighbour, Mrs. Cranberry, is clutching a notebook and a pair of opera glasses. "For scientific purposes," she whispers, though she's already started writing possible apparition. 8:14 p.m. before anything actually happens. On stage, the medium appears. Tonight it's the renowned Monsieur Baguette, whose real name is probably Gerald. He's dressed in flowing robes, a silk turban, and a scarf that seems to be shedding mysterious powders. He greets the audience in a booming voice, promising contact with the spirit world, or at least with the next street over. The crowd hushes as the room darkens further. All eyes are glued to the stage, except for Mr. Pickering in row 2, who is busily unwrapping a suspiciously noisy toffee. The show begins with table rapping and mysterious bell ringing. Someone's umbrella falls over, and half the room jumps, convinced it's the ghost of Lord Byron making his entrance. Monsieur Baguette invites the spirits to communicate, and, after an awkward pause, the table twitches dramatically, right as he places his knee beneath it. The audience gasps, half in awe, half in amusement. Was that a message from beyond, or just an overcooked joint acting up? Next comes the main event, the materialization of ectoplasm. Monsieur Baguette closes his eyes, breathes deeply, and begins to convulse ever so slightly. Out comes a long string of what looks suspiciously like yesterday's laundry, pulled from his sleeve, his collar, and, at one particularly memorable show, from behind his ear. Ectoplasm, he assures everyone, is a mysterious substance only visible in dim light, and only accessible to those pure of heart, or willing to pay for a second ticket. You watch as the crowd reacts. Half are wide-eyed, leaning forward, whispering excitedly. The other half are stifling laughter, or pretending to sneeze every time a new glob of spirit matter hits the floor. A woman in the front row faints elegantly, which may or may not be part of the act. The local newspaper's reporter is scribbling furiously, possibly spelling "help me" in Morse code. For the grand finale, the medium encourages questions from the audience. Miss Eglantine inquires about her late husband's favourite socks. Monsieur Baguette stares into the middle distance and announces they are with him in the spirit realm, unmatched as in life. The crowd nods solemnly, and Mrs. Cranberry jots down, socks, possibly eternal. By the end of the evening, everyone files out into the foggy night, a little giddy, a little skeptical, but thoroughly entertained. Some claim they felt a cold hand brush their cheek, while others suspect the drafty windows are to blame. The mist machine coughs up one final cloud for dramatic effect as the last ticket holder leaves. Was it real? Did you glimpse the other side? Or did you just pay for the world's strangest magic show with a side of existential dread? Either way, you have a new story to tell, and a strong desire to never eat cheesecloth again. In Victorian England, the line between grief, curiosity, and a night on the town was thinner than the veil itself. And honestly, you can't wait to go back next week. Forget email. In Victorian England, you might send letters to the dead via automatic writing. You grip a pencil, ask Auntie Gertrude for advice, and hope your possessed handwriting is legible enough that your descendants won't judge your spelling mistakes. It starts innocently enough. A quiet evening, the rain tapping on the windows, and a room full of people who have exhausted every possible topic of polite conversation. Enter the medium, draped in her signature lace, producing a stack of blank paper and a handful of suspiciously well-sharpened pencils. "Tonight," she declares, "you'll be writing to the other side, and you thought the most dangerous thing you'd do was try the boiled pudding. The process is simple. You close your eyes, clear your mind, and let the spirits guide your hand. In practice, this means a lot of squinting, hunching, and trying not to let anyone see you doodling in the margins. The room is silent, save for the scratch of graphite and the occasional suppressed giggle as someone's pencil suddenly produces what looks suspiciously like a drawing of a fish wearing a top hat. You focus. What would you ask Auntie Gertrude, who was legendary for her sponge cake, and even more so for her unsolicited advice? "Dearest Auntie," you begin, "should I invest in railway shares or stick to safe government bonds?" Your hand jerks. The pencil scrawls a looping no. Either the voice of the beyond, or your subconscious remembering last year's financial disaster. Either way, you add a few exclamation marks for spiritual emphasis. Not all letters are so straightforward. Some people receive messages in Latin, French, or what may be the world's worst attempt at shorthand. Others end up with entire pages of mysterious squiggles. Madame Euphrosyne, ever the optimist, assures you that any message, no matter how cryptic, is packed with meaning. The spirit world, she says, is notoriously bad at spelling. The fun doesn't end when the writing stops. Now it's time to decipher the results, preferably with a straight face. Everyone reads their message aloud. Mrs. Wigglesworth's pencil has written, "Move the vase," which is either a profound warning or her late husband's final attempt to reorganize the sitting room from beyond the grave. Mr. Pickering gets, "Eat more turnips," which he insists must be a sign from his health-conscious grandmother and not his own guilty conscience. Occasionally, the writing is so legible, so specific, that the whole group leans in, breathless. "Beware the green hat," someone's letter warns. Suddenly, everyone looks suspiciously at Mrs. Cranberry's unfortunate choice of headwear. Automatic writing, it seems, is just as effective at stirring up drama among the living as it is at contacting the dead. Once the evening is over, the letters are carefully folded and tucked away in boxes between pages of Bibles, or, if you're really dedicated, pinned to your bedroom wall like a Victorian vision board. Some people collect them, convinced that if you put together enough scribbled warnings, you'll eventually receive the ultimate advice on love, fortune, or the recipe for truly edible boiled beef. For the diehards, automatic writing becomes a habit. They dedicate special journals, decorated with black ribbons and hopeful flourishes. Every Thursday night, rain or shine, they sit down and wait for the spiritual Wi-Fi to connect. Some weeks, the pages remain blank. Other times, they're filled with shopping lists, mysterious recipes, or cryptic complaints about the state of the afterlife's plumbing. But at its heart, automatic writing is less about supernatural wisdom and more about connection. It's a chance to reach out, to imagine voices in the silence, and to fill the dark with words. Even if those words are mostly "turn up the heat" or "do not eat the soup," the pen may not always be mightier than the sword. But in the hands of a Victorian spiritualist, it's at least more entertaining. And so, as you place your latest letter under your pillow, you drift to sleep wondering if Auntie Gertrude will answer, or if she's too busy reorganizing clouds on the other side. Either way, you're oddly comforted, because, in the end, it's not just the living who crave a little correspondence. You're surrounded by an array of odd gadgets, spirit trumpets, bells that ring themselves, and gloves designed to channel ectoplasmic handshakes. It's half laboratory, half circus, and you're definitely not getting your security deposit back if any of this stuff leaves scorch marks. Welcome to the Victorian séance, where innovation and eccentricity go hand in gloved ectoplasm. Tonight, the parlor is less a cozy drawing room and more a cross between an inventor's workshop and a school play about haunted laundry. The medium, naturally, arrives with a trunk of equipment, looking less like a spiritual conduit and more like someone about to assemble flat-pack furniture with spiritual assistance. First up, the spirit bell, a dainty silver bell on a velvet cushion, allegedly able to ring all on its own when a ghost is nearby. The room is tense. Everyone watches as the medium solemnly invites spirits to make themselves known. 5 minutes of silence follow. The bell remains stubbornly silent until Madame Euphrosyne accidentally nudges the table and the bell gives a pitiful little tinkle. Everyone gasps. Mrs. Wigglesworth nearly faints into the plant pot. Mr. Pickering is convinced his late uncle is sending a message about overdue library books. Next, the infamous spirit trumpet makes its appearance, a long, shiny, cone-shaped device that looks like it was stolen from a marching band with a strong supernatural theme. Supposedly, spirits can whisper messages through the trumpet, amplifying their voices so the living can hear. The lights are dimmed, the curtains drawn, and the audience is told to sit in total silence. The medium lifts the trumpet, and everyone waits, breathless, for a spectral voice to cut through the gloom. Instead, a soft, slightly wheezy hello emerges, a sound that suspiciously resembles Madame Euphrosyne after a long climb up the stairs. Then come the phantom hands. Yes, hands, crafted from wax, paper, and possibly leftover luncheon meat. These are slipped onto gloved arms and concealed beneath black velvet. When the lights go out, the medium invites everyone to reach out. If you feel a cold touch, she whispers, know that the spirits are greeting you. Inevitably, someone yelps as a suspiciously clammy glove brushes their wrist. Mr. Pickering's moustache bristles with excitement, or possibly just static electricity. That was most certainly Aunt Maud, he insists, though everyone suspects it was Gladys reaching for another biscuit in the dark. And don't forget the writing planchette, a little wooden board on wheels, topped with a pencil, which allegedly allows spirits to scrawl out their messages. The medium places her fingers on the device, closes her eyes, and soon the planchette is scribbling furiously across the page. The result is mostly illegible, though the group agrees it looks vaguely like "send more jam," a request both practical and eternal. There's a homemade EMF detector, Victorian style, of course, a jar of frogs, a magnet, and a strong dose of optimism. It does nothing except annoy the frogs. But Madame Euphrosyne assures everyone this is a sign that energies are fluctuating. Miss Eglantine, who once read a pamphlet on static electricity, nods with deep seriousness. Every so often, an unfamiliar whir or pop erupts from the tangle of cords and wires. The room fills with the smell of singed linen, but the spirits seem unbothered. The gadgets keep everyone engaged, equal parts spectacle and science fair. There's the feeling that, just maybe, one of these blinking, ringing, twitching contraptions will finally bridge the gap between worlds. By the end of the evening, you're exhausted and slightly deafened by phantom bells. You gather your things, careful not to brush against any waxy fingers or suspiciously moist gloves. The parlor is filled with the satisfied sighs of people who came searching for ghosts and instead found a small army of gadgets with questionable electrical safety. As you leave, you realize the truth. In the Victorian era, belief and technology are inseparable. Ghosts may or may not be real, but the effort to catch them with bells and whistles is half the fun. Besides, if you ever need to explain those scorch marks to your landlord, just blame it on the spirits. They can't be reached for comment. It's 2 a.m. and you wake up to a cold spot in your bedroom. Is it a draft, a dead relative, or just that you forgot to pay the gas bill again? Victorians catalogued ghostly visitations with the same obsessive detail most people reserve for true crime podcasts. Your eyes dart around the dark room. The candle stub is guttering on the dresser, and you're suddenly hyper-aware that your feet are sticking out from under the covers. A rookie mistake. You yank them back in, just in case a phantom hand decides to check your pulse. The wallpaper seems to shimmer, the shadows on the ceiling gather conspiratorially, and somewhere, the ancient pipes in the wall let out a groan so mournful it could win a poetry contest. In Victorian England, these are the moments you live for and dread. The Victorians are obsessed with ghostly house calls. You can't swing a mourning locket in polite society without someone launching into a 15-minute account of the night Cousin Arthur's spirit rearranged the cutlery. Paranormal happenings are meticulously documented, compared, and debated. The Society for Psychical Research is probably the only club with more ghost stories than a kindergarten sleepover. The etiquette is clear. If you're visited by a spirit, you're expected to describe the encounter in breathless detail the next day. Was it a shuffling, a sighing, or a spectral dog barking at an empty chair? Did the apparition say anything? Or just stand awkwardly by the wardrobe like an unwanted guest at a party? The more vivid your story, the more status you gain. He appeared at the foot of my bed, muttered something about pickled onions, then vanished into the wainscoting. Your neighbour, Mrs. Wigglesworth, claims she has a visitor every Tuesday, usually her late husband, who insists she's overwatering the ferns. Mr. Pickering, across the street, reports nightly visitations from his grandmother, who's apparently come back to criticize his choice in slippers. Some households become so popular with the dead that it's standing room only for the living. At this point, you half expect to come down to breakfast and find a ghostly line forming for tea. For the amateur ghost hunter, there's no shortage of tools to confirm a haunting. You place flour on the floor to catch footprints, string bells in doorways to catch invisible breezes, and, for the technologically ambitious, set up a glass of water to see if it ripples with the passage of an unseen guest. Of course, half the time the only thing you catch is the cat having midnight zoomies, but that never stopped anyone from writing a strongly worded letter to the local spiritualist society. Ghost etiquette is important too. You're supposed to treat your spectral visitors with dignity and respect. Leave out a chair, offer a word of welcome. Good evening, Aunt Agatha. Do make yourself at home. Just please don't knock over the clock again. The truly fashionable Victorian household even keeps a guest book for apparitions, ready to record the night's visitations in painstaking copperplate handwriting. December 7th, 2:17 a.m. Suspect Grandfather George. Scent of tobacco and regret. Sometimes, though, the ghosts don't come with warnings. You might just wake up to find your spectacles in the bread box, or your slippers mysteriously moved to the attic. There are endless debates in the spiritualist newspapers about the proper way to interpret these signs. Did the spirit mean to communicate a message, or just confuse the living for entertainment? More than one family has had a heated argument over the meaning of an upside-down candlestick. In the end, whether or not your ghostly house calls are the real deal or just the result of a drafty Victorian manner, it hardly matters. The stories bring people together, brighten otherwise endless nights, and provide the perfect excuse for why you didn't get any sleep. Sorry I'm late. The spirit of my great-uncle wouldn't stop complaining about the drapes. So next time you wake at 2 a.m. to a suspicious chill, don't panic. Just grab your pen and start documenting. Because in Victorian England, you're never truly alone. And your ghostly visitors? They're probably just here for the company and maybe a midnight snack. You're at a séance, and someone's 7-year-old suddenly announces they can hear voices from the other side. Is it a message from beyond, or just another excuse to delay bedtime? Either way, everyone's too terrified to say no. Victorian séances are already a delicate balance of superstition and social anxiety. But nothing tilts the room quite like the pint-sized psychic. Tonight, the group is gathered in a parlor dimly lit by candlelight and clouded with the scent of burnt toast and lavender. Madame Euphrosyne is halfway through her opening monologue about crossing the veil when little Beatrice, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear, pipes up. There's a lady in the corner who says she likes the curtains. Silence falls. Mrs. Wigglesworth gasps. Mr. Pickering looks ready to leap out the window. The medium, normally the star of the show, must now share her spotlight with someone whose last profound message involved a crayon drawing of a potato. But you can't ignore a child medium. It's simply not done. In the Victorian imagination, children are believed to be closer to the spirit world, hovering somewhere between innocence and outright supernatural Wi-Fi. Suddenly, every adult's question is directed to Beatrice. Ask if the lady knows where my cufflinks are, whispers Mrs. Wigglesworth, eyes wide. Can she tell me if the weather will clear up for my picnic? Begs Miss Eglantine, clutching her notepad. The medium looks both offended and relieved. At least now she can blame any awkward silences on the child's developing powers. Beatrice closes her eyes, squeezes her bunny, and tilts her head in the time-honored tradition of small children about to invent something fantastic. She says there's a cat under the sofa, and also, please stop singing in the bath. Everyone stares at Mrs. Cranberry, who is notorious for her off-key renditions of God Save the Queen. Mrs. Cranberry turns beet red, clearly unsettled that her bathroom recitals are now part of the official family haunting. This is the moment when the séance transforms from somber ritual to impromptu show and tell. The adults hang on Beatrice's every word, desperate for messages from their dearly departed, long-lost jewelry, or at the very least, next week's soup recipe. She delivers pronouncements with the confidence only possessed by children and fraudulent spiritualists. The man in the top hat wants more jam. Grandpa says your socks don't match. The dog ate the sandwich you were saving. Every revelation is met with gasps, nods, or nervous giggles. The more vague the message, the more convinced the group becomes of its accuracy. She's a natural, whispers Madame Euphrosyne, as if nurturing a budding prodigy. The spirits speak freely through the innocent, but there's a twist. Victorian child mediums were, in some circles, genuine celebrities. They were paraded before crowds, introduced at private séances, and occasionally written up in the local spiritualist newsletters. There were tales of children who could speak in ancient languages, predict rainstorms, or channel long-dead sea captains who only wanted to complain about the porridge. Of course, it isn't all fun and games. Sometimes the messages from beyond are a little too honest. The lady says your hat is silly. The man in the shadows wants more cake and less talking. Uncle Herbert is sorry about the goose, but he's not giving it back. Even the medium can't keep a straight face as the group descends into laughter, partly from relief, partly from the absurdity of being gently roasted by the afterlife through a 7-year-old. Eventually, bedtime calls. Beatrice yawns theatrically, clutching her bunny, and announces she's tired of ghosts now. The séance wraps up with a round of polite applause, awkward goodbyes, and at least one person quietly searching under the sofa for a spectral cat. In the end, whether Beatrice is truly channeling the spirits or just playing along, she's done what few mediums can, left the entire room charmed, slightly bewildered, and determined to hide their socks and hats for next time. And as you drift off to sleep, you wonder if the spirits really do have something important to say. Maybe they'll wait until after bath time. It's portrait day, and you're propping up great-grandpa for one last group photo. Victorian memento mori photography means posing with the recently departed. So smile and try not to blink, because the dead certainly won't. Let's take a moment to appreciate the unique genius of the Victorians, who managed to turn death into both a social occasion and an art project. In an age where photography itself is new and thrilling, it's only logical to invite the recently deceased for one last family portrait. You never know when you'll next have everyone together, and besides, great-grandpa's schedule has really opened up. Preparing for a memento mori photo session is a production that makes your annual holiday card look like an afterthought. The photographer arrives, somber, professional, and toting enough heavy equipment to double as a mobile blacksmith shop. He sets up his camera, arranges curtains to block out the insistent Victorian sunlight, and politely inquires about the guest of honor's best side. The answer, naturally, is the one that's easiest to keep upright. Everyone in the family dons their best morning attire, a parade of black veils, high collars, and stiff shoes. No one dares risk a pop of color. The living children are combed, scrubbed, and told under pain of extra chores to stand still and not pick their noses. Meanwhile, great-grandpa is positioned in a chair, carefully supported by a system of stands, cushions, and, occasionally, discreet bits of rope. If your Victorian household is especially well prepared, you might even have a special mourning frame, a device specifically designed to keep the dearly departed from slumping mid-photo. Innovation, after all, is a family value. The instructions are clear. Everyone must hold perfectly still. This is much easier for some than others. For the living, the challenge is to not blink, not sneeze, and not faint from the combined heat of the gas lamps and their own emotional tension. For the dead, it's a triumph of Victorian technology that anyone manages to stay seated at all. If the photo session goes especially well, the deceased might even be posed with an open book, a favorite pet, or, for the especially whimsical, a musical instrument. You never realize how many hobbies your relatives had until someone tries to wedge a violin under great-grandpa's arm. Then comes the moment of truth, the long exposure. You all stand, hearts pounding, as the photographer counts slowly. Hold and hold, the minutes stretch, the baby wiggles, Aunt Mildred sniffles. But great-grandpa is the picture of serenity, no blinking, no complaints, no fidgeting. In the final photo, it's the living who often look the most suspiciously animated, while the departed appear calm, dignified, and eerily photogenic. If your eyes happen to close, well, there's always next year. For everyone else, that is. Once developed, the photo is carefully displayed on the mantelpiece, a tribute to both family bonds and Victorian determination to keep everyone involved, alive or otherwise. These memento mori images become treasured heirlooms, proof that not even death can excuse you from a family photo. Friends and neighbors come to admire the results. "What a lovely likeness," they say, squinting at the pale, motionless figure in the center. "He looks so peaceful, or at the very least, he looks like someone who's finally gotten out of Sunday chores." Beneath the formality and faint sense of the macabre, there's real tenderness in the ritual. These photos are acts of love, a way to remember, to mourn, and to say goodbye. They capture a moment when the family, in all its mismatched glory, is together. And if it happens to be a little spooky, a little awkward, and just the tiniest bit unsettling, well, that's just how the Victorians liked it. So, next time someone complains about having to stand still for a selfie, just remind them, At least nobody had to be propped up for posterity. In the Victorian family album, everyone is welcome, even if only one of you is guaranteed not to blink. You've just heard of the Fox sisters, who claim to chat with ghosts via mysterious rapping noises in their upstate New York house. Before you know it, their spiritual antics have crossed the Atlantic, and now everyone in your neighborhood wants a ghost of their own. It starts innocently enough. A few stories in the penny papers, whispers in the tea shops, and suddenly the entire British Isles is abuzz with the exploits of Maggie and Kate Fox, the original ghost influencers. The Foxes, two unassuming teenagers with a flair for the dramatic and a suspiciously strong command of toe-cracking, became overnight sensations. One minute, they're living in a creaky farmhouse. The next, they're the toast of Victorian society, hailed as the first reliable Wi-Fi hotspot for the other side. You can't escape it. Everywhere you go, people are testing their walls for hidden spirits. Neighbors are inviting you over for just a quiet evening, which turns out to be a competitive séance, complete with notepads, hammers, and the promise of light refreshments if someone can successfully summon the ghost of Napoleon. Mrs. Wigglesworth has started referring to her attic as the rapping room and claims her late husband communicates through suspicious banging noises. Usually at the same time, the neighbor's laundry line is flapping in the wind. The Fox sisters' method is simple but irresistible. Ask the spirit a question, listen for a knock, 1 for yes, 2 for no. It's the world's spookiest game of 20 questions, and soon every child in your street is quizzing their ancestors about missing socks and dessert privileges. You sit in drawing rooms filled with hopeful Victorians, all perched on the edge of their fainting couches, straining to hear a sign from the beyond. The tension is so thick, you could cut it with a mourning brooch. Professional mediums suddenly face serious competition. Madame Euphrosyne eyes the Fox sisters with equal parts envy and suspicion, muttering about American showmanship and threatening to install a rapping device under her own parlor floorboards. British séances adopt the new style with gusto. Your local grocer now offers spirited potatoes, certified ghost-free, or your money back. Even the Society for Psychical Research, usually as staid as a soggy crumpet, dispatches a delegation to investigate, armed with notebooks, stopwatches, and the world's most judgmental monocle. Of course, not everyone is convinced. The local vicar is quick to point out that his church bells have been ringing for centuries without ever relaying a message from Great-Aunt Mildred. Skeptics gather in smoky pubs, wagering pints on whether the rapping noises are genuine spirits, clever tricks, or just the house settling after a heavy rain. Meanwhile, children all over the country have developed suspiciously advanced skills in synchronized toe cracking, and you suspect a cottage industry is about to be born. The craze escalates. Families post advertisements. Wanted. Ghost willing to communicate, must be punctual and not prone to swearing. People hold rapping competitions, where the winner is the one who manages to get a ghost to answer, "What is the capital of Prussia?" without using the encyclopedia. Neighbors compare haunting stories with the kind of fervor usually reserved for royal gossip or a new shipment of oranges. But beneath all the knocking, giggling, and entrepreneurial toe gymnastics, there's something sweet. The Fox sisters, and the spiritualist movement they inspired, gave people a way to make sense of loss, uncertainty, and those strange bumps in the night. Suddenly, the dark wasn't so lonely if you could believe someone, somewhere, was rapping out a message just for you. Even if it did sound suspiciously like the central heating. In the end, whether the Fox sisters were clever frauds, true believers, or simply bored teenagers with an excellent sense of timing, they changed the way a whole era thought about death and about noise complaints. And as you drift off to sleep, you can't help but wonder, if you heard a gentle knock from under the bed tonight, would you ask a question or just blame the cat? Either way, you make a mental note to check your socks and your shoes, just in case the spirits or the Fox sisters decide to drop by. Is it really a ghost? Or is someone just playing with static electricity and magnets under the table? Victorian science loves to crash the party, and you'll need a magnifying glass, a strong stomach, and a degree in wishful thinking to keep up with the latest theories. You're at a séance, and the room is thick with the scent of beeswax, anticipation, and questionable cologne. Half the guests have one eye on the spirit trumpet, and the other on the local chemist, who has, for reasons unknown, brought his own set of brass rods, a suspicious glass battery, and what appears to be a jar of experimental frogs. Victorian England is nothing if not committed to multitasking. Why summon a ghost the old-fashioned way when you can involve at least 3 scientific disciplines and the possibility of mild electrocution? The séance begins with the usual solemnity. The medium, Madame Euphrosyne, asks everyone to hold hands, close their eyes, and concentrate. But tonight, the group includes Dr. Erasmus Flinders, a man with impressive mutton chops and an even more impressive dedication to the application of scientific principles in spiritual matters. As soon as the table so much as wobbles, Dr. Flinders is on his knees, peering beneath it with a candle and a ruler. Fascinating, he mutters. Note the magnetic oscillations. Suddenly, the séance is less about ghosts and more about gadgets. Dr. Flinders distributes metal rods for everyone to hold. He claims they're sensitive to spiritual vibrations, but they look suspiciously like curtain rods from his parlor. He sets up a galvanometer, determined to measure the presence of ectoplasm in electrical current. If your hair stands on end, he explains, it's either the presence of a spirit or you've accidentally sat too close to the battery. The medium is unfazed. She adds a bit of animal magnetism to the proceedings. Mesmerism is all the rage. After all, this involves waving her hands in elaborate gestures and occasionally hypnotizing the family dog. You're not sure if you're about to contact the dead or be persuaded to cluck like a chicken on command. The science-minded guests are delighted. They bring out test tubes of mysterious fluids, jars of electric eels, and magnets shaped like everything from horseshoes to hats. Miss Eglantine, inspired by a recent article in the Gentlewoman's magazine, volunteers to operate the electrostatic generator, which promptly sparks, fizzles, and nearly sets the drapes on fire. A sure sign of supernatural interference, says Dr. Flinders, though everyone suspects faulty wiring. Even the most skeptical guest gets drawn in. Dr. Flinders claims he can weigh the soul by placing a pigeon on a scale during the séance. If it suddenly gets lighter, it's because a spirit has taken temporary possession. When the pigeon escapes and flaps around the room, everyone agrees it's the most action the séance has seen all evening. The boundaries between science and spiritualism blur deliciously. The Society for Psychical Research, recently formed and terribly proud of their business cards, dispatches investigators armed with notebooks, thermometers, and a slightly nervous-looking beagle. They sit in dark corners, scribbling down every creak, tap, and inexplicable sneeze. Was it the ghosts, or just the moldy curtains? No theory is too far-fetched. Some guests argue that electricity is the language of the dead, while others insist it's merely a convenient way to explain the sudden urge to jump when someone pokes you with a charged rod. Animal magnetism, mesmerism, table turning, and spontaneous combustion all compete for attention. One thing is certain: if the ghosts don't appear, at least the audience is guaranteed a demonstration of the latest in experimental mishaps. By the end of the evening, you've learned 2 things. The Victorians will believe almost anything if you add a dash of science, and never trust a séance that requires protective gloves and a fire extinguisher. As you leave, Dr. Flinders offers you a pamphlet. Madame Euphrosyne blesses your aura, and the beagle sniffs your shoes for signs of supernatural residue. You may not have contacted the beyond, but your hair is standing on end, your hands are tingling, and you're reasonably sure you've just witnessed the most electrifying show in town. In Victorian England, science and spiritualism go hand in hand, and occasionally, hand in battery. For every genuine spiritual encounter, there's at least a dozen people hiding bell wires and mysterious foot pedals. It turns out the real magic trick is making money while keeping a straight face. Victorian spiritualism is a booming business, and if you can't find a ghost, you can always improvise. The average séance is less a holy ritual and more a cross between amateur theatre and low-budget magic show. Every other drawing room in England features a gifted medium, a creaky table, and an audience determined to spot a ghost, or at least not fall asleep before the cheese course. You arrive one drizzly evening to find the local spiritualist, Madame Fortuna, already centre stage. Her accent wanders from Budapest to Birmingham within a single sentence. Her eyes dart around the parlour, searching for skeptics and loose change with equal enthusiasm. "I see a presence here tonight," she intones, glancing pointedly at Mr. Pickering's pocket watch. "A presence who wants to be remembered." Mr. Pickering clutches his watch tighter. Before the lights even dim, you notice the preparations. Bells hang at suspiciously reachable heights. A trumpet rests on the windowsill, positioned just so. The curtains ripple, not from a supernatural breeze, but from the enthusiastic pumping of the household's smallest child, recently bribed with toffee to assist the spirits. In the Victorian séance, everyone's in on the act, except the guests who still believe they're about to get financial advice from beyond the grave. As soon as the table starts rapping out Morse code, you suspect foul play, but no one wants to break the spell. Politeness is, after all, the backbone of British society, and the best friend of a clever trickster. Even when Madame Fortuna's handkerchief mysteriously rises in the air, everyone claps politely, ignoring the thin string that attaches it to her sleeve. The real secret to success is to keep your audience somewhere between dazzled and gently embarrassed. Some mediums take their act to the next level. Spirit photography is in vogue, and it's amazing how many dearly departed relatives show up in family portraits, always lurking just behind the photographer's own nephew. Ectoplasm is summoned with suspicious regularity, usually looking a lot like cheesecloth and smelling faintly of laundry soap. One enterprising duo famously produced a talking skull that offered stock tips before being unmasked as a clever ventriloquist and his long-suffering cousin Derek. But the golden rule of Victorian spiritualism is, the more elaborate the setup, the less likely you are to question it. If the medium insists on total darkness, elaborate tablecloths, or everyone wearing gloves for spiritual safety, you can be reasonably sure someone's about to crawl under the furniture. Some séances even employ trapdoors, secret signals, and code words like magnolia. Translation: "Please pass the port, the spirits are thirsty." Of course, the Victorians aren't entirely credulous. Exposés abound in the penny papers. Sensational headlines proclaim, "Famous medium caught with bellows and bacon," or "Ghost turns out to be Aunt Margaret in a sheet." The newly formed Society for Psychical Research dispatches investigators to séances with notebooks, measuring tapes, and an air of barely contained skepticism. Occasionally, the investigators catch a fraud in the act, but more often than not, they're left with more questions and invitations to next week's event. But amid all the trickery, there are the rare, stubborn believers, mediums who genuinely believe in their powers, or at least hope they're not just very creative sleepwalkers. The occasional honest medium stands out for their refusal to charge a fee, their lack of cheesecloth in the sleeves, and their tendency to burst into tears when anything actually happens. In the end, whether it's the thrill of the unknown, the charm of the spectacle, or just a desire for distraction from the relentless gloom of Victorian life, people keep coming back. Maybe it's human nature to hope, to wonder, and to squint into the shadows while checking under the table for bell wires, just in case. So next time you're at a séance and the medium asks you to dim the lights, keep an eye on your silverware and your skepticism handy. Because in Victorian England, the only thing more common than a ghost is a very inventive hoax. And honestly, half the fun is trying to tell the difference. There are rules to this, apparently. Never insult the spirits. Always offer them a comfortable chair. And if the ghost asks for tea, don't ask whether they take milk or lemon. It's rude to question their afterlife dietary needs. In Victorian England, good manners are the highest currency, right after actual currency and, perhaps, well-timed fainting. When it comes to communing with the dead, etiquette isn't just for the living. There's a whole unwritten code for how to properly entertain a spectral guest, as important as knowing which fork to use for dessert, or how to pretend you understand French at dinner. Step 1. Greeting your ghostly visitor. A polite good evening is essential, followed by the offer of a seat, ideally a cushioned one, though no one's quite sure if the dearly departed prefer velvet or horsehair. Tradition dictates you introduce yourself, state your business, and, if possible, make a little small talk about the weather in the afterlife. Ghastly, I'm sure. Anything less is considered unforgivably rude, and no one wants to be known as the host who snubbed a poltergeist. Seating arrangements matter. The most comfortable chair is reserved for the spirit, ideally by the fire and not too close to any mirrors. Mirrors, as every respectable Victorian knows, are notorious portals for awkward hauntings and bad hair days. Never, ever ask a ghost to stand in the corner. Even spirits appreciate a little dignity, and besides, you wouldn't want to risk a supernatural sulk, which, according to folklore, can last for centuries and cause all your houseplants to wilt. Refreshments must be offered, though it's best to err on the side of caution. Water, a modest biscuit, or a thimbleful of sherry are traditional. If the ghost asks for something more substantial, such as boiled mutton or the family silver, gently redirect the conversation. It's poor form to question the dietary habits of the deceased. And if a spirit requests a slice of cake, try not to serve the same flavor that hastened their departure in the first place. Conversation should be respectful, soothing, and, above all, never too personal. It's best to steer clear of how they died, unfinished business, or any mention of unpaid debts. Instead, discuss safe topics, recent weather, improvements in street lighting, or how much quieter the house is since the ban on public dueling. If a ghost brings up unfinished business, respond with a sympathetic nod and a non-committal, "How interesting." For the love of Queen Victoria, do not try to give the ghost advice on moving on. Nothing irritates a Victorian spirit quite like unsolicited afterlife coaching. Compliments are welcome, but never overdo it. Telling a ghost they look translucent and ageless is considered flattering. Asking for the secret to their skincare routine is not, and under no circumstances should you ask how long they plan to stay. Some spirits are just dropping in. Others have been haunting the drapes since the Crimean War. At the close of the evening, it's essential to bid your guest farewell in a mannerly fashion. Thank them for their company, wish them safe travels through the ether, and politely suggest that the cellar door is always open if they'd like to visit again. But don't get too enthusiastic. A spirit that feels too welcome may never leave, and no amount of sage will mask the scent of supernatural overstay. There's even etiquette for reporting your ghostly social calls to others. Always praise the spirit's good manners, never mention if they rearrange the furniture, and above all, avoid discussing any embarrassing mishaps. Like the time Aunt Prudence's spirit knocked over the punch bowl or got stuck in the grandfather clock. In the end, Victorian ghost etiquette is less about keeping the spirits happy and more about upholding a code of dignity, poise, and relentless hospitality, even in the face of the unexplained. Because, in a world obsessed with manners, the line between a guest and a ghost is thinner than a mourning veil. And really, you never know when you'll need a good reference in the afterlife. So next time you sense an otherworldly chill or a faint rattling of the teaspoons, remember, stand, bow, and offer the best chair. Because in the game of spiritual society, good manners are truly eternal. Feeling unwell? Forget doctors. Victorian spiritualists might prescribe a little séance-based healing. Just sit in a circle, close your eyes, and try not to think about the last time your spirit healer washed their hands. In Victorian England, where the cure for a headache often involved leeches, mustard plasters, and a bracing whiff of carbolic acid, it's no wonder people turn to the spirit world for medical advice. If your local physician has run out of ideas and, frankly, patience, there's always a medium, clairvoyant, or magnetizer ready to diagnose your ills and channel a prescription straight from the great beyond. Tonight, you find yourself at a healing séance. The parlor has been transformed into a makeshift clinic, all flickering candles and lingering clouds of lavender water, which, your neighbor insists, wards off negative energy and possibly small rodents. Madame Euphrosyne, decked out in her healing shawl and enough bangles to weigh down a lesser mortal, stands at the center. Around her, a circle of hopeful, sniffling Victorians await their supernatural house call. The process begins with a collective deep breath, though not too deep, considering the questionable air quality. Each participant describes their ailment. The list is a symphony of the era's greatest hits: gout, lumbago, melancholy, nerves, and one gentleman who claims to be allergic to sunlight, hard work, and most forms of conversation. Madame Euphrosyne closes her eyes, invokes the healing spirits, and begins to sway. The rest of the circle tries not to sway with her. No one wants to knock over the brandy. Suddenly, her hand shoots out and lands on Mrs. Wigglesworth's shoulder. The spirits say your lumbago is the result of carrying emotional burdens, she intones. Also, perhaps, a very heavy handbag. Mrs. Wigglesworth nods solemnly and promises to carry fewer grudges, at least until next week's bake sale. Next, it's Mr. Pickering's turn. He's been suffering from gout and has already tried every known remedy, including cold compresses, warm compresses, compresses soaked in gin, and the careful avoidance of anything remotely fun. Madame Euphrosyne presses a hand to his forehead, mutters a few words in what might be Latin, and recommends nightly foot baths, accompanied by positive thinking and, if possible, a small donation to the spirit's favorite charity. Not all spirit healings are so gentle. Occasionally, the laying on of hands involves more enthusiastic patting, mysterious oils, or the strategic waving of a fan to disperse negative auras. One healer is famous for brandishing a crystal pendulum and chanting until half the room is asleep and the other half is unsure if their headache is gone or simply forgotten. Advice from the spirits is, at best, creative. Feeling tired? Sleep with a potato under your pillow. Bad luck? Tie an onion to your doorknob. Recurring cough? The ghost of a Victorian nurse suggests fresh air, thick scarves, and not reading by candlelight. But what if it's serious? Someone whispers. Madame Euphrosyne assures them, with the confidence of a woman who has never had to explain her credentials, that the spirits have seen far worse, and all things pass in time, especially if you drink more tea. Of course, none of these remedies replace the time-honored Victorian tradition of ignoring your symptoms until they either go away or become someone else's problem. Spirit healing isn't about results so much as it is about hope, community, and the thrill of a new method. At the end of the night, everyone claims to feel a little better, if only from all the sitting, breathing, and gossiping about who had the most dramatic aura. You head home with a lighter step. Your gout, or at least your worries about it, somewhat soothed by the glow of spiritual attention and the promise that somewhere, on the other side, a team of ghostly nurses is rooting for your recovery. Just remember to keep your potato under your pillow and your skepticism close at hand, because in Victorian England, belief is the strongest medicine of all. Game night gets competitive when half your team is invisible. Victorians turn every conversation with the dead into a parlor game, and the only prize is the satisfaction of out-creeping your neighbors. Gone are the days when charades or whist were the evening's main event. In the golden age of spiritualism, the must-have item in every respectable drawing room is not a deck of playing cards, but a talking board. Ouija boards, spirit slates, and alphabet wheels are rolled out like exotic desserts, promising both entertainment and the faint, exciting whiff of existential dread. The evening starts innocently enough. You and your guests gather around a beautifully carved table. draped in black velvet and crowded with nervous hands. The rules are explained. Everyone places a finger lightly on the planchette, or if you're feeling daring, on a teacup turned upside down for the budget-conscious ghost hunter. No one pushes, no one cheats, at least, that's the official line. In reality, Aunt Mildred is already angling for an early lead by channeling her late husband's competitive streak. First question: is there a spirit present? The planchette trembles, wobbles, and then, with just a hint of showmanship, slides over to yes. There's a collective gasp, followed by a suspicious sideways glance at Cousin Harold, whose knuckles are turning white. The board is suddenly alive with questions, each more urgent than the last. Will I marry rich? Did you steal the good silver? Where are my spectacles? All mixed with the timeless favorite, what's the afterlife really like? Spoiler: the answer is usually vague. As the game goes on, the questions grow bolder and the answers more cryptic. The spirits have a way of sidestepping awkward topics, much like any polite Victorian at a dinner party. Who will inherit Aunt Agatha's fortune? Is met with an unhelpful Mabe. Is Mr. Pickering's pudding safe to eat? Receives a resounding no, prompting laughter, relief, and a quiet note to self about skipping dessert. Not to be outdone, the children demand a turn. This quickly devolves into the planchette, spelling out boo, run, and feed the cat, much to the delight and mild concern of the assembled adults. The dog, sensing chaos, joins in by howling at an empty corner, proving once again that even household pets want a say in the afterlife. Some families keep score, awarding points for the eeriest answer, the fastest spirit, or the most convincing shriek. There are rules against intentional cheating, but the dead are, by their very nature, hard to penalize. It's all fun and games until someone accuses the spirit of favoritism, at which point the lights flicker and everyone rushes to blame the wind, the cat, or a particularly judgmental ancestor. For the true enthusiasts, parlor games escalate into tournaments. Table-turning marathons, séance speed rounds, and automatic writing relays. Prizes include nothing more than eternal bragging rights and, occasionally, the family's last remaining biscuits. The evening stretches on, fueled by nervous laughter and a steady supply of tea, strong enough to revive even the most reticent ghost. By midnight, the parlor is filled with a sense of achievement and just the faintest whiff of burnt toast. A sign, perhaps, that someone's late husband is displeased with the night's outcome. Everyone leaves with stories to tell, rumors to spread, and a renewed suspicion that the next family reunion might be even more competitive if the ancestors get involved. And so, as you extinguish the last candle and tidy away the talking board, you realize that the real fun isn't in the answers you receive, but in the questions you dare to ask. Because in Victorian England, game night isn't just for the living, it's for anyone or anything willing to play. You can buy mourning cards, black-edged stationery, and matching coffin-shaped candy dishes. Victorians never missed an opportunity to monetize misery, and death becomes just another excuse for retail therapy. In an era when even mild happiness is considered suspicious, the mourning industry is booming. Death, far from being a private affair, is now a public production, complete with souvenirs, strict etiquette, and endless opportunities to outgrieve your neighbors. If you think weddings are complicated, just wait until someone in your family shuffles off this mortal coil. Suddenly, you're knee-deep in catalogs offering everything from custom casket handles to jet black umbrellas with discreet monograms. The only thing more inevitable than death is the invoice that follows. The first stop for any respectable Victorian mourner is the stationer's shop. Here, you browse a bewildering selection of mourning cards, all edged in the deepest black and embossed with tasteful lilies or dramatic angels. There are calling cards to announce your grief to acquaintances, envelopes so somber they might just sprout a tear, and black-bordered notepaper for every condolence, thank you, and gentle reminder that the family dog is now, too, in mourning. If your stationery isn't at least 2 shades darker than your mood, you're simply not doing it right. Then there are the keepsakes. The market for memorial trinkets is endless. There are lockets for hair, lockets for ashes, and, if you're truly committed, lockets big enough for a small paragraph of the deceased's last will and testament. Brooches made from jet, onyx, or gutta percha are the accessory of the season, each one declaring to the world, yes, I am sad, and yes, it is very expensive. You can even have a miniature portrait painted inside your mourning ring, perfect for discreet weeping at parties. But why stop there? The truly fashionable home is filled with reminders of your recently departed loved ones. There are coffin-shaped candy dishes, both decorative and practical, black crepe wreaths for the door, and even mourning drapes for the windows, just in case the neighbors were unaware of your bereavement. Mourning attire is its own retail universe. Entire shops are devoted to dresses, hats, veils, gloves, and the all-important mourning handkerchief, preferably embroidered in black thread and washed only in tears. For children, there are mourning dolls, small, black-clad figures meant to help little ones process grief, or possibly just terrify them into good behavior. And let's not forget the pets. There are mourning collars for dogs, sashes for cats, and, if you search hard enough, tiny hats for guinea pigs, all available for a modest fee, naturally. Coffin makers, too, know their clientele. The well-to-do can choose from a range of luxurious materials. Polished oak, inlaid mahogany, or, for the extravagant, lead-lined models guaranteed to withstand even the nosiest of grave robbers. Options include monogrammed handles, plush interior cushions, and the latest in spring-loaded casket technology, a real crowd-pleaser for those who fear being buried alive. Better safe than sorry is practically the industry motto. Even the humble funeral procession is an opportunity for competitive shopping. Horse-drawn hearses are available in black, blacker, or night on the moors. Mourning carriages can be rented by the hour, with draped curtains and built-in compartments for discreet sobbing. If you want to make a real statement, you can hire professional mourners, actors who weep on cue, faint dramatically, and ensure that no funeral goes unnoticed. Yet beneath the retail spectacle, the mourning industry serves a genuine purpose. It gives structure to chaos, turning grief into a series of manageable steps and purchases. It lets people express their loss in tangible ways, building little monuments out of ribbons, cards, and commemorative teaspoons. And in a world where sorrow is ever present, a little retail therapy might be just what the spirit doctor ordered. So, next time you find yourself browsing black-edge stationery or considering a new brooch, remember, the Victorians did it first, and they did it in style. Because if you must be sad, you might as well look good doing it. Queen Victoria sets the tone for the entire nation when she turns perpetual grief into the season's must-have look. If you're not crying stylishly in public, are you even British? It all begins in 1861, when Prince Albert, Victoria's beloved husband, trusted advisor, and all-around earnest German, passes away, leaving Her Majesty and the nation awash in a sea of handkerchiefs and black crepe. The Queen, never one for half measures, embarks on a period of mourning so intense and so fashion-forward that it sets the gold standard for public sadness. Suddenly, wearing black isn't just appropriate, it's patriotic. Mourning becomes the ultimate it accessory, and a single tear glistening on your cheek is now more fashionable than any diamond tiara. For Queen Victoria, mourning isn't a phase, it's a lifestyle. Her wardrobe becomes a symphony of somber hues, jet, obsidian, and, for days when she's feeling wild, deepest charcoal. The court tailors are run ragged, churning out mourning gowns with trains long enough to trip the family dog and veils so thick that, by all accounts, Her Majesty was able to nap through the dullest of state functions. She insists on black jewelry, jet brooches, onyx rings, bracelets made from Albert's own hair. If you want to win the Queen's favor, Forget about jewels. Show her a piece of tasteful mourning stationery, and you're in. The public, never ones to let a royal trend pass them by, leap into mourning with the same enthusiasm they previously reserved for tea scandals and royal weddings. Shops overflow with mourning goods. Window displays turn from festive and floral to funereal and fabulous. The phrase "dressed in mourning" is uttered with a mixture of envy and terror, especially as etiquette experts begin publishing entire books on how to grieve properly, color charts, fabric guides, and, for the especially anxious, a flowchart to help you decide if you're still allowed to wear your purple cravat. Even the least fashionable Brit finds themselves swept up. To neglect your mourning attire is to risk public shame, icy stares, or, worst of all, a rebuke from the local vicar's wife. Suddenly, it's not enough just to wear black. You must coordinate your hat, your gloves, your outerwear, and even your umbrella. If your mourning ensemble doesn't scream devastated but dignified, you might as well not leave the house at all. The rules are relentless. First mourning, full black, no trims, no fun, lasts at least a year. Then comes second mourning, a hint of grey or purple if you dare. And finally, half mourning, when you're allowed to introduce something approaching color back into your wardrobe, preferably something so subtle that only the keenest eye would notice. The process is so complex that some families employ professional mourning consultants, who, for a modest fee, will outfit you from veil to boots in a style suitable for both heartbreak and high tea. Victoria herself never fully emerges from her sartorial sorrow. For 40 years, she remains the world's best-dressed widow, a living emblem of national loss and stoic endurance. While other royals flit about Europe in bright silks and jewels, the Queen is a beacon of black. Artists paint her in shadowy elegance. Poets wax rhapsodic about her eternal veil. Mourning becomes not just a private sorrow but a shared social event, complete with rules, rituals, and the occasional retail opportunity. Underneath it all, there's something quietly powerful about this royal example. For Victorians, mourning is a way to connect through fashion, ritual, and a sense of collective feeling. In a world obsessed with appearances, Queen Victoria reminds everyone that sometimes the most beautiful thing you can wear is sincerity. So next time you're tempted to complain about a dress code, remember, the Victorians, led by their queen, turned even sadness into an art form. And if anyone asks why you're dressed in black at breakfast, just sigh dramatically and say, "It's what Victoria would have wanted. Shopping for a new house? Make sure it comes with a resident spirit, preferably one with a tragic backstory and a fondness for flickering gas lights. Extra points if it occasionally knocks over the silverware. In Victorian England, haunted real estate is all the rage. It isn't enough to have a spacious drawing room, south-facing windows, or a well-tended garden. No, the true mark of a refined home is a ghostly lodger, preferably the sort who glides mournfully through the halls at midnight, sighs by the window on rainy afternoons, and generally acts as the world's most polite, if slightly melancholy, roommate. Forget granite countertops. What you really want is a wailing ancestor in the scullery. It's no accident. The property market is booming, and nothing adds value to a gloomy manor or city townhouse like a history of spectral activity. Estate agents, ever alert to the shifting tides of fashion, highlight every odd draft and unexplained cold spot as a selling feature. Charming pied-à-terre with period moldings, original fireplaces, and frequent supernatural visitations, the adverts say, as if ghostly interference is just another part of the plumbing. Viewings become a blend of house tour and ghost hunt. The owner, or their best friend from the local séance circle, regales you with tales. This was the old nursery, and on foggy nights you can sometimes hear the faint laughter of little Edith, who vanished with the family silver in 1812. In the master bedroom, A portrait on the wall is always watching, except when you look directly at it, in which case it's just deeply unsettling. Oh, and if the cupboard door rattles at 3 a.m., don't worry, that's just Lady Fortescue, letting you know the weather's about to change. Haunted houses come with their own etiquette. Prospective buyers are expected to inquire politely about the ghost's habits. Are they the moaning type, or more the silent, looming sort? Have they ever appeared at tea? Is there a specific anniversary when you can expect the kitchen table to levitate? Practical buyers know to check for signs of a friendly ghost. Unfriendly ones can cause more than the occasional inconvenience. No one wants to discover a poltergeist with a penchant for throwing crockery every time you serve overcooked beef. But most Victorians secretly hope for the perfect resident spirit. The ideal ghost is tragic, tasteful, and not too noisy. It should have a good origin story, maybe an unfulfilled love affair, an untimely demise in the conservatory, or a mysterious disappearance involving a missing hat and a packet of questionable ham. Bonus points if it leaves cryptic messages on the mirror or occasionally corrects your spelling in the dust on the bookshelf. Neighborhood status can rise or fall depending on the quality of your hauntings. Mrs. Wigglesworth is the envy of the street thanks to her spectral coachman, whose clanking chains and distant whistling are the talk of every garden party. Mr. Pickering, not to be outdone, claims his hallway is occasionally home to a headless nun, though the evidence is mostly a draft and a smell of lavender that no amount of scrubbing can erase. The truly unlucky, of course, end up with a ghost who's just boring, a former tax clerk who only ever rearranges your newspapers. Real estate agents embrace the trend with glee. Haunted, but in a good way. Their signs read, 2 bedrooms, 1 spectral presence, move-in ready. Even housewarming gifts reflect the fad. Protective talismans, black candles, and the occasional jar of sage. For after that first awkward meeting, ultimately, having a resident ghost gives your home character a touch of drama and a reason to discuss inheritance law at dinner without anyone thinking you're getting ahead of yourself. Because in Victorian England, a good haunting is the ultimate property value booster. A blend of old-world charm, social cachet, and the distinct possibility that your teapot will float gently off the shelf when company arrives. So, when you next tour a gloomy old villa and hear a mysterious tap-tap-tap in the walls, don't run. Take it as a sign you've found a home with history, personality, and an extra guest, one who never outstays their welcome, but will always keep your life and your silverware interesting. Is it possible to actually prove a spirit's existence? Victorian scientists, philosophers, and a few over-caffeinated dogs are all on the case, armed with journals, tape measures, and a deep fear of the dark. Picture yourself in a chilly London laboratory, circa 1874. The walls are lined with shelves of leather-bound tomes. The air smells faintly of paraffin and unresolved trauma, and the mood is equal parts mad science and indoor camping trip gone wrong. This is where the greatest minds of the age gather to chase ghosts, like the world's most serious group of paranormal Boy Scouts. Only with more tweed, and somehow even less sunlight. At the center of the room stands the Society for Psychical Research, a grand name for a club where philosophers, doctors, and suspiciously eager journalists try to answer the big question, what happens when you die? They approach the mystery with every tool at their disposal. Some set up elaborate traps involving flour on the floor to catch invisible footprints, glass bells to catch invisible hands, and thermometers to see if ghosts prefer a bracing draft. The evenings begin with high hopes and low lighting. Everyone takes turns peering through monocles, scribbling notes, and arguing over the best way to interview a spirit. A philosopher insists on using logic to trick the dead into revealing themselves, while a surgeon from Birmingham believes the answer is to wire up a séance participant to a galvanometer and watch for electrical surges. The family dog, dragged along for control purposes, alternates between barking at empty corners and falling asleep on the coldest patch of floor, which everyone secretly suspects is haunted. Experiments grow ever more creative, and sometimes ever more desperate. There are measuring tapes stretched across doorways to see if spirits can slip by unnoticed. In one memorable session, a medium is placed in a sealed glass box to prove she can summon spirits without using her feet. The experiment ends with the medium sneezing, the box fogging up, and everyone agreeing to write up the results later. A philosopher claims to have invented a spirit scale, able to weigh the soul as it leaves the body. All it manages to weigh is a passing cat and a tray of sandwiches. At least once a month, the newspapers publish a breathless report. Eminent scientist photographs, actual ghost. The photo is always, without fail, a blurry smudge, a trick of the light, or the photographer's own thumb. Still, the public eats it up. If science can put a man on a steam-powered tricycle, why not capture a Victorian poltergeist on film? Hope springs eternal, along with skepticism and the occasional, exasperated sigh from a wife, waiting for her husband to return from another all-night haunting. For every serious investigator, there's a rival group of pranksters, bent on exposing frauds and hoaxes. They sneak into séances armed with magnets, rubber tubing, and scientific skepticism, only to leave rattled when a bell rings unexpectedly or a cold draft chills the room. More than one ambitious debunker ends up convinced, or at least convinced that the living can be just as mysterious as the dead. But despite all the gadgets, graphs, and heated debates, no one quite manages to pin down the truth. Spirits, it seems, are experts at dodging scientific scrutiny. Appearing only when the notepads are closed, the cameras are pointed elsewhere, and the dog is asleep. The afterlife, much like the Victorian railway timetable, remains infuriatingly elusive, and yet the search goes on. Night after night, by candlelight and under the watchful gaze of their monocled peers, Victorian truth-seekers scribble down every rattle, chill, and odd shadow. Not because they expect definitive proof, but because the quest itself is strangely comforting. Maybe the greatest discovery isn't the spirit, but the stubborn hope that there's something more, waiting just out of sight. Somewhere in the flicker of the gaslight and the pages of a very enthusiastic lab notebook. As you drift off to sleep, you realize that the Victorians' quest to keep in touch with the dead was really just a way to feel less alone. In a world full of strange gadgets, spooky stories, and questionable advice from the afterlife, maybe we're all still looking for a little comfort in the dark. The séance tables have been packed away, the mourning veils folded into mothball-scented drawers. But the longing lingers. Victorian England may be long gone, but their peculiar brand of hope endures. The hope that the veil can be lifted, that someone on the other side is still listening, and that maybe, just maybe, there's a message waiting in the creak of a floorboard or the flicker of a candle. Even if you don't believe in ghosts, it's hard not to find yourself wishing, sometimes, that your ancestors could peek in just to see how badly you're folding the fitted sheet. Our fascination with the afterlife has simply adapted to the times. The Ouija boards and spirit trumpets might gather dust, but now we have ghost-hunting TV shows, late-night podcasts, and apps that promise to detect unusual energy fields but mostly pick up your neighbor's Wi-Fi. People still leave out offerings for the dead, though these days it's more likely to be a glass of wine at the family altar, or a slightly burnt piece of toast set aside in the hope that Grandad's spirit is still hungry. The Victorians left us a legacy of curiosity, and not a small amount of good-natured mischief. They turned the business of talking to the dead into a proper pastime, complete with etiquette guides, special outfits, and more accessories than a steampunk convention. But for all the cheesecloth ectoplasm and mysterious wrapping, the real miracle was how these rituals brought people together. Families gathered, neighbors talked, even the shyest guest at a party found themselves included in the game of "What's that strange noise coming from the attic?" It wasn't really about the ghosts. It was about connection. When grief pressed in from every side and life was fragile, unpredictable, and occasionally damp, the Victorians created ways to reach for each other across the table, even if half the participants had already crossed over. Sitting in a circle, hands barely touching, everyone could pretend, if only for a moment, that nothing and no one was ever truly lost. And so the obsession never really ended. We still love a good ghost story. We still pause when a floorboard creaks in the night, half hoping, half fearing that something is there. We invent new technologies, write new stories, light candles for ancestors, and sometimes, quietly, in the dark, whisper questions to the ones who've gone before us. Even our anxieties are recycled. The Victorians worried about angry spirits if they forgot to mourn properly. We worry that we're haunted by old texts and unread emails. Their mourning jewelry has become our cherished keepsakes. Their midnight séances have become sleepovers with scary movies and a flashlight under the chin. But if the Victorians taught us anything, it's that it's perfectly normal to want a little comfort from the unknown. Their elaborate rituals and gadgets were, in the end, just creative ways to say, "I miss you. I hope you're out there. I hope you're listening." Maybe that's all anyone ever really wants, haunted or not. So as you drift off tonight, safe and sound, tucked beneath your very unhaunted duvet, spare a thought for the Victorians. Stubborn, sorrowful, hopeful, and a little ridiculous. They remind us that the search for connection, comfort, and a little light in the darkness is as eternal as any ghost. And if you hear a bump in the night, just roll over and say, "Good night," and don't touch the biscuits. After all, everyone deserves a peaceful sleep, living or dead. It's not a proper Victorian gathering unless you're nervously nibbling on cucumber sandwiches while waiting for a spectral guest to knock over your sherry. Do you offer refreshments to the spirits? Is it rude not to? And if a ghost eats all the biscuits, do you blame the afterlife or just Gladys from down the road? In the world of Victorian spiritualism, hospitality is everything. A séance isn't just a solemn occasion for communing with the other side. It's an event, a social spectacle, and, if you play your cards right, an excuse to break out the good tablecloth and try out that new recipe for invisible custard. The menu is as important as the medium. Before you even think about inviting the local spirits, and Mrs. Wigglesworth into your parlor, you must decide what's for supper. The evening begins with the gathering of snacks, an elaborate ritual in itself. The table groans under the weight of perfectly cut sandwiches, crusts removed, of course, little cakes dusted with enough sugar to summon a different kind of spirit, and the ever-present sherry decanter gleaming temptingly by the window. There are pickled onions for the brave, blancmange for the truly optimistic, and a mysterious jelly that no one quite remembers making but always seems to turn up at these things. Refreshments are not just for the living. Mediums like Madame Euphrosyne insist that spirits enjoy a well-laid table. It's tradition to set out an extra chair, a symbolic cup of tea, and perhaps a small plate of Victoria sponge, though no one has ever confirmed whether the dearly departed have a preference for lemon or plain. The spirits are terribly fond of seed cake, Madame Euphrosyne whispers, eyeing the plate as if daring anyone else to take the last slice. Then comes the challenge of etiquette. If a ghost is polite enough to RSVP, or at the very least knock 3 times on the mantelpiece, it would be unspeakably rude not to offer refreshments. Conversations grow hushed as people speculate. Do ghosts eat? Do they drink? Can they appreciate a nicely aged cheddar? Mr. Pickering insists that his late Aunt Marjorie always appears for trifle, while Miss Eglantine claims she once watched a scone levitate when the vicar wasn't looking. Inevitably, someone will blame the missing biscuits on supernatural intervention. "It wasn't me," says Gladys, brushing crumbs from her lap. "It was the spirit of Great Uncle Humphrey." The group nods solemnly, grateful for a convenient scapegoat. If ever there was an advantage to Victorian spiritualism, it's having an excuse for the vanished fruitcake. Blame the dead, not the living. Certain foods are believed to attract specific spirits. Dark breads for those in deep mourning. Sugared almonds for the sweet-tempered souls. And never, ever serve red jelly, rumor has it. It invites the kind of ghosts who rearrange your china and make puns in Latin. There are even guides to pairing spirits with, well, spirits. A drop of port for the poetic, sherry for the shy, and a generous splash of brandy for the especially dramatic apparitions. But more than anything, séance snacks are about comfort, small, familiar rituals in the face of the unknown. When the candles flicker and the medium murmurs, it's nice to have something to hold on to, even if it's just a slightly stale Madeleine. Sharing food, even with the invisible, makes the darkness seem less daunting. And if the afterlife really is an endless dinner party, at least you'll be prepared. As the evening winds down and the last crumbs are swept away, everyone feels a little closer, if not to the dead, then at least to each other. Perhaps that's the real magic. The chance to sit together, eat, laugh, and pretend, just for a night, that the veil is thin, the company eternal. And there's always another biscuit somewhere, just out of sight. So next time you set the table for a séance, leave an extra slice for the spirits. And never underestimate the power of a good sandwich to bring people, living and otherwise, together. Long before Facebook memorials, Victorians tracked the comings and goings of their friends and frenemies in the local obituary column. Reading about who recently passed to the great beyond becomes an evening ritual, right up there with tea, and quietly panicking about who's haunting your attic. Every morning, you unfold the newspaper with the anticipation of a child opening a present, or perhaps the dread of opening your credit card statement. The obituary column is the original social feed, and you scan the headlines for familiar names, shocking departures, and the latest tragic mishaps involving runaway carriages, exotic imported cheese, or sudden fainting spells at the opera. Victorian England is a competitive place, and even death is something to keep up with. You pour your tea and settle in for the evening scroll. There's old Mr. Pennyfeather, departed this life in his sleep, much loved and never in want of a good waistcoat. There's Mrs. Gubbins, who leaves behind 12 children, 3 pet canaries, and a collection of novelty teapots that no one knows what to do with. Sometimes there's even a dash of poetic flair, passed from this mortal coil, serene as a swan gliding across a mill pond. You can almost hear the collective sigh of envy from families still haunted by restless, grumpy ghosts. Obituaries are not just news, they're social currency. Did the Smiths secure 2 full inches of column space for their dearly departed, while your own cousin barely squeezed in between a lost dog notice and an advert for patent mustache wax? The stakes are high. A cleverly worded memorial is the Victorian equivalent of going viral. The right phrase can earn you dinner, invitations, compliments, and, if you're lucky, a spot on the most mourned list at the Ladies' Aid Society. For some, it becomes a hobby. There are albums and scrapbooks dedicated to the best written obituaries, complete with marginalia like splendid turn of phrase, and could do with fewer references to gout. Families compare notes at breakfast. Did you see how tastefully Mrs. Wigglesworth's death was announced? And at such short notice, too. Yes, but the font choice was rather bold, don't you think? This ritual of doom-scrolling is not without its perils. You find yourself anxiously checking for your own name, just in case the newspaper editor got overzealous. And there's the occasional awkward moment at a party, when you congratulate someone on their lovely tribute, only to find out their great-aunt Beatrice is, in fact, still alive and halfway through her morning kippers. Yet for all its somber purpose, the obituary column is a place for a bit of mischief too. Pranksters occasionally sneak in false reports, announcing the tragic demise of Lord Waffles, beloved spaniel, sorely missed by the garden gnomes. Rivalries simmer as families compete for the wittiest epitaph or most poetic farewell, and, inevitably, rumors swirl about the recently deceased. Did you hear what really happened at the Christmas pudding incident? The Victorians may be obsessed with etiquette, but they never say no to a little posthumous gossip. But beneath the layers of drama and social jockeying, there's something soothing about this nightly ritual. Reading obituaries is a way of keeping track, not just of who has left, but of who remains, and how we choose to remember. The names, dates, and stories stitch together a community, offering comfort, closure, and sometimes the odd chuckle at a well-placed pun. So, as you finish your tea and fold the paper, you're left with the peculiar peace of knowing who's still around to haunt the next garden party. The attic remains suspiciously creaky, the teapot collection ever more mysterious, and tomorrow's news promises more tales from the great beyond. Because for the Victorians, as for all of us, the end of one story is simply an invitation to keep reading. Victorian spiritualists were convinced that pets could sense ghosts, and possibly even channel them. If your dog stares into the corner for hours, is he communing with a long-lost soul or just plotting to eat your slippers? Either way, you start treating your goldfish with a lot more respect. Pets in the Victorian household are more than just companions. They are supernatural security systems with fur, feathers, or occasionally very slippery scales. Every parlor has its own collection of animals, each suspected of harboring a sixth sense and a keen interest in the affairs of the afterlife. As a responsible Victorian, you're expected to pay close attention to your animal's behavior, if only so you have something to blame when the curtains rustle and your biscuits disappear. Let's start with the dog. Fido is the family barometer for ghostly goings-on. One minute he's napping under the sideboard. The next, he's on full alert, ears perked, staring into the corner with such intensity that you wonder if he's channeling the spirit of an ancient sheepdog or simply waiting for someone to drop a sausage. The Victorians hold firm to the belief that a barking dog is never just barking at nothing. It's always a warning. Beware, there's a ghost behind the umbrella stand. Or perhaps, beware, there's a spider. Both equally terrifying. Cats, of course, are another matter. Every feline in Victorian England is assumed to be part ghost already. Midnight prowls, sudden hisses at thin air, and those long, unblinking stares at the empty hearth, all are taken as evidence that your cat is either on very familiar terms with the spirits or is plotting to overthrow the household. Some families even claim their cats have guided them safely through haunted rooms or delivered cryptic messages from deceased relatives. If your cat coughs up a hairball on the anniversary of Great-Uncle Reginald's passing, well, who are you to argue with fate? Parrots, budgerigars, and canaries also play their part. The more loquacious the bird, the more likely it is to pick up a phrase from the afterlife. Sometimes a loving hello, other times a chilling get out. Nothing livens up breakfast quite like your parrot suddenly mimicking the cough of a long-dead grandparent. It's unclear whether the bird is truly channeling the departed or just showing off. But either way, you resolve to mind your language around the cage. Goldfish, too, come in for their share of supernatural suspicion. Victorian magazines feature earnest advice columns debating whether a goldfish's sudden leap or a mysterious bubble pattern is a sign from the other side. Miss Eglantine down the street swears her fish swim in the shape of her late aunt's initials every Thursday. And there's always a lively debate at tea about whether that means the spirits are pleased, displeased, or simply fish illiterate. For the spiritualist, a pet's reaction during a séance is vital. Does the dog whimper when the planchette moves? Does the cat refuse to join the circle? Does the parrot chime in with, "Don't trust the medium," at a crucial moment? All signs are noted with grave seriousness and, if possible, entered into the séance ledger. Should any animal leave the room in a hurry, the group agrees this is the ultimate endorsement. or a reminder that someone has left the kitchen door open. Even the skeptical Victorians can't help but watch their animals with newfound reverence, just in case the family guinea pig is, in fact, a tiny furry oracle. Pet collars are occasionally engraved with protective symbols, and the odd guinea pig might find itself adorned with a black mourning ribbon for luck. So next time Fido barks at the wall, or your goldfish seems particularly philosophical, don't scold. Offer them a polite good evening, a little extra biscuit. And, just in case, check the corner for visitors from beyond. In the Victorian age, you never know who or what might be passing through. As we drift quietly back from the flickering candlelit parlors of Victorian England, take a slow breath and let the last hints of ectoplasm fade into the night. You've survived another wild evening of mysterious rapping noises, earnest mediums, and enough black lace to curtain an entire opera house. And you did it all without accidentally summoning a ghostly accountant to audit your dreams. Let's take a moment to honor those stubborn Victorians who stared death in the face, shrugged, and decided to invent a new hobby: chatting up the dead, just to make the darkness a little less lonely. They layered meaning and ritual onto grief, wore sadness like a uniform, and built an entire industry around their desire for comfort, connection, and, let's be honest, a really good party trick. So tonight, as you settle into your warm, ghost-free bed, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your 19th century spiritual ancestors, the ones who turned loss and longing into séances, sentimental jewelry, and the world's most complicated board game. They remind us that humans will do just about anything to feel a little less alone. Whether it's holding hands around a table, sending a telegram to the beyond, or just telling stories in the dark. Because history, even when it's weird, a little sad, or slightly ridiculous, is still a testament to the endless hope and creative persistence of people who came before us. And if nothing else, it's proof that when the world gets strange, we all need a few good friends, living or otherwise. Rest easy, knowing that you're safe, your biscuits are not being pilfered by invisible hands, and that you can always choose the living over the dead for your next dinner party. Good night, and may your sleep be peaceful, your dreams be gentle, and your only midnight visitors be cats who want to snuggle.